Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our first virtual meeting for the Youth Access to American Jobs in Aviation. We are excited that you all have been with us thus far, and we hope you are able to stay with us as this continues. What I would do next is turn it over to Sharon DeVivo, our Youth Task Force Chair, so that she can introduce the panel that's coming up next. Thank you.
Well, welcome back from lunch, everybody. I thought we had a really terrific conversation this morning, and I think that just bodes well for our work together as a task force. So this afternoon is about learning, right? And finding out some of the great programs that are going on across the country and or the research that has been done about pathways and barriers to aviation and aerospace careers. And so I'm really excited to have a group of 5 panelists. Our first up is Vanessa Jameson Blacknell, who is the chair of the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals, a group that has reached more than 70,000 young people since 2006. Vanessa, looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us. Unmute yourself, Vanessa.
And of course, I'm talking away because I've been on mute majority of the morning. So thank you. I have literally enjoyed listening to the conversation this morning and knowing the direction that this the Youth Access to American Jobs in Aviation Task Force is going. And that with your leadership, Sharon, is truly important. And I just want to say thank you to the DOT and FAA for this opportunity and having OBAC represent. So I do know that we are a little behind, and I want to indicate that I do have another engagement, so I may drop off as soon as I finish my presentation, and please understand. But I wanted to start with something that I thought about for you guys this morning, and that is one step can start a journey. One song can change a moment. One smile can start a friendship. One hug can lift a soul. One candle can wipe out darkness. One life can make a difference. One word can start a prayer. One hope will lift a spirit. One touch can show you care. Be that one today. And I will tell you that the way you guys started this morning, I am absolutely proud to say that you have started a difference. So I want to introduce OBAC. Thank you very much, Leslie. And with OBAC, the organization started in 1976 by Ben Thomas. Mr. Thomas, unfortunately, was unable to find employment, and he had to sue Eastern Airlines. Once he did get the job, he found that there was a very limited number of pilots that existed. And so he pulled a group of pilots together, and they formed the Organization of Black Airline Pilots. Approximately 10 to 15 years ago, OBAC decided to make the change to the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals. It's been a difficult transition because we still have a very pilot-centric organization, but I'm happy to say that we are moving in the right direction. From the conversation today, I found a couple of comments that I wanted to just add. And actually, I have so many notes, I don't even follow my own notes. So I want to tell you the impact that you've had on me this morning has been tremendous again. We talk about the first generation pilots. That's what really what OBAC really represents, as first generation. Majority of our individuals that come to us that are youth have no clue or idea of what aviation or aerospace is about. So with that in mind, we also created our new logo called Dreams to Careers, because it's important to know that dreams fuel the future. And in order to get to those careers, we have to create those dreams. So who better to start this with this youth task force and continue what we do? OBAC has actually 4 to 5 serious pillars that we follow, and that is the aerospace professionals in schools, our aerospace career enhancement, it's our ACE academies, our collegiate programs, as well as our aerospace professional development programs, and our scholarship awards. We've awarded over $5.8 million, and we will continue to use that with the support of everyone that we have. Next slide, please. This is our board of directors. I wanted to show this to you for really good reasons, and that is this is the current state, but the future state is changing as of December 31st. I will no longer be the chair of OBAP, but the new chair will be Joel Webley and Pamela Williams, who is also on the Women in Aviation Task Force. So I'm really pleased and excited to make that turnover for this team. But I want you to know that this board has been so diligent in trying to affect the changes that have happened with the pandemic and ensuring that our board is moving in the right direction. So I'm very proud to list these individuals who also can tell you that majority of them are first generation pilots and others as well as human resources. So you did talk about the workforce shortage with the pilots, the technician, crew members, as well as maintenance. My board has been so energetic in trying to find ways and doing things differently during this pandemic, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about the impact of COVID and what that has done. And I mentioned the leadership changes already and some of the things that we have provided during this time. So it just demonstrates that even though a change does occur, that we can adapt and we have to be agile in order to accomplish the tasks that we need to do. So OBAP, as I mentioned with those pillars earlier, we have decided the first thing that came about when the pandemic occurred was to do a courageous conversation series. Many of the people that are on this panel and on the task force participated in that courageous conversations. And it's my opportunity to again thank you for being a part of those courageous conversations. During that time, we provided an overview of what it was like in the aerospace industry and feeling the effects of systemic racism and what's been happening in the aerospace industry. It was a gift. Those gifts open doors. And by having those conversations, and I'll get into a little more details about that, we were able to provide opportunities to our members. For instance, Airbus. Airbus had downtime and they allowed us and gave us scholarships. As a matter of fact, there were 8 scholarships that we received. 5 of them were with helicopter rotary and 3 were in Airbus type rating. That was something that never would have happened if we didn't have this pandemic, because we've been trying for many years to get into the doors of these manufacturing companies as well as other companies, but we never were able to do that. So again, this was a gift. Again, I mentioned the leadership changes that are going to occur. I also wanted to mention the importance of our OBAP spring meeting. That's an annual meeting that's required by our bylaws, as well as our annual conference. To accommodate that, we were going to work with Vaughn College for the first time and share that OBAP experience and work with Vaughn to really touch their youth and their collegiate students to understand what OBAP represents, but unfortunately, it did not happen. But we were able to pivot immediately, and then we created a virtual OBAP spring meeting. The reason for mentioning that is because the spring meeting was scheduled for April, and we were able to still have our virtual spring meeting in April. That in itself is tremendous. We talked about funding. You guys spoke about funding and the critical components of that. We know that funding is something that we have strived for. Ms. Holmes indicated that as a 501c3, it is important that we look at and know that we have struggled and we ask for the sponsorships and partnerships. But building those bridges is so important, but we do have individuals that have stepped up and provided opportunities, which is something that's not happened before. Lastly, on this particular slide, I want to talk about our annual conference. Our annual conference is our primary fundraiser. Because that fundraiser was not available, it took away our livelihood, literally. But we decided to, again, pivot, make sure that we were able to do this in a very productive way. And we had a virtual conference. And then we decided to celebrate, and hopefully some of you did attend. And it was called Mask Off 2025. And we actually raised $25,000 as part of our virtual effort. And we actually received a match from an organization, and actually it was a company that never sponsored anything for us before. Next slide, please. This is the numbers that I wanted to talk about with the courageous conversation. That 5-part series indicated it was a very intense and very serious discussion. The discussion, again, focused around the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor situation, but everything that was happening at that time and is still continuing today. OBAP is known for its advocacy, but we're also known for our education and our youth programs. But giving you just an idea of the magnitude of individuals that participated, majority of the people that participated weren't even members of OBAP. So we knew that this opportunity and discussion was needed and it was important. And again, thank you to members of this task force, as well as other people that are on the panel that participated to make this a success. Next slide, please. This is just another indication of the marketing and the tools that we use to get this courageous conversation out. And what I saw this morning, listened to this morning from the presentations of the committees, the subcommittees, this is all about conversation, and it's all about discovering how can we be effective? How is this funding going to be used? But knowing that these grassroots organizations like OBAP, we can't exist without funding, but we are doing so much and will continue to do that as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the aerospace professionals in schools. This is just to give you an idea of just last year alone and over the last 5 years, really. But just last year alone, we touched 55,000 students. And during that week, we have 2 primary months that we do it. And actually next week is going to be our virtual APUS. And we have started our Girls Launch program, which is going to be October 24th. And next week will be in schools. But from last year, we were able to touch over 55,000 students. And as you can see, in October, we reached close to 20,000. And in Black History Month, we reached close to 24,000. And we keep growing because we know that the message and what we're saying, that the children need to see, youth need to see people that look like them. Next slide, please. The aerospace professionals in schools, again, is just another breakdown of now with the teachers. And we realized with working with JetBlue and during this virtual environment, we had a very successful first time virtual ACE Academy. And I'll talk about that in a minute, excuse me. But in this process, we've also started tracking who are the teachers that we're impacting. Because I know that you talked about this earlier as well, and that is teachers and school counselors are really the ones that we have to target. Not only, and I'm gonna take it even a step further because you had that discussion as well, and it's important for me to mention the parents. We must do something with the parents and teachers collectively to help create the awareness for these programs. Next slide, please. So again, our ACE Academy is one of our solid pillars. We canceled 33 for 2020, which were face-to-face. What our ACE Academy is a brief overview. It's a 1-week program. In that 1-week program, they touch every aspect of aerospace and aviation. We do tours and we create an environment where the last day they get to solo. And so that's that dream, creating the dream and that aspiration to continue. But this year we were fortunate to work with JetBlue, and we created our first virtual ACE Academy. We had over 104 applicants. We actually selected 70 students. And of those 70 students, they said it was one of the best experiences they had. We did it for 2 days. They actually wanted it to be 4 to 5 days. Well, if that enthusiasm is there, that's great, but that's a lot of work. And doing virtual tours such as the FAA Tower, as well as using the JetBlue schools and maintenance, it was really a wonderful event. But as you can see by the number of academies that we've had over the years, we continue to work with the FAA, of course, in following their standards for these ACE academies. Next slide, please. Our other big pillars are collegiate chapters. We have 15 collegiate chapters. They're very proud, and that I wanted to show you the efforts that they're putting in on their own in the collegiate environment. Those students are so special, and they are our future, but we have to continue to find ways to support them because it is a financial cost, whether it's by trying to become a pilot or even aviation management. It is something important to realize that these students are struggling and having to do the things that are important to them, but also it's important that they give back. Next slide, please. These are just examples of the chapters that we have. Those will continue to grow, but our latest is the University of North Dakota. And we're so excited to have them as part of the OBAP chapter family. Next slide, please. This is Western Michigan, and they are out doing their things with students and volunteering for the Martin Luther King event day. Next slide. This is Embry-Riddle, and it has to be Daytona with those palm trees, and they're just staying there enjoying themselves, but what a great group of students. Next slide, please. And here in Middle Tennessee State University, they're doing their food pantry work, and these students are just, again, so delightful to continue to give back in order to make our organization well-known in the community. Next slide. Auburn University, another idea, another group. That's one of our regional directors that's actually gone out to the school to visit with the students. We continue to let them know how important they are and what their efforts are in moving forward into the future. Next slide, please. One of the things I heard somebody say, and even in the chat box, you guys were talking about no one wants to start a flight school. Well, OBAP did. And it's been around for 2 years now, and it's called the Luke Weathers Flight Academy. This academy we launched June 21st, 2018. And as you can see by the slide, what we do offer, but what I want to highlight is that in these 2 years, we have actually 200 discovery flights. We've had 3 instrument ratings, 11 African-American female have soloed, total of 36 students have soloed. We have 5 commercial pilot certificates, 27 males, including in that 32, of course, 8 private pilots, 6 CFIs, 2 multi-engine ratings, and 5 CFI instrument ratings. What's important about this also, I want to talk about a couple that who wanted to find out during the Courageous Conversations, what could they do? So instead of the corporate sponsorship that we generally try to go after, individuals are stepping up to do things. They brought their plane down just last week and helped certify 3 of our students to go into their multi-engine ratings. That was their time, their talent, and their money that they put behind providing these opportunities for these students. Next slide, please. Lastly, our pillar that is very important also to OBAP is the Aerospace Professional Development Program, our APDP. Our role in APDP has been for years to mentor and support individuals that are trying to get into careers whether at the collegiate level, internships, or going into a professional development, any type of career. So the other issue that's outstanding right now is the furloughs. So we have always had a furlough resource guide, and we've been doing webinars to support them by bringing in individuals who have gone through this to talk about it and creating financial stability and how to work through a pandemic, as well as understanding your finances when you are potentially going to be furloughed. So our APDP program has been extremely successful, and we will continue to grow that program as well. Next slide, please. Well, that is a big thank you, but here, what I wanted to say, and I wrote a couple of things down, and please forgive me. I wasn't using my slides as I thought I would, but I wanted to say to the panel, I ask that you really look at OBAP as and other minority groups or any affinity groups to establish the resourcing and understand that through our organization, learn from us, ask us questions, let us be a part of the solution, because I know that we can. We talk about these other organizations that have been around for years and have this funding and the support on a national level. And that's great, but look at grassroots organizations like ours. Look to build our dreams, look to build the youth dreams. Also help us partner with other companies, manufacturing companies. And lastly, we are the pathway. We are the ones who can work with the parents, help the parents understand the value of what is needed in this space. The financial aspects will always be a discussion. How do we minimize that, or how do we create opportunities to help that grow? And let us be the advocate for you as well as the organizations, and be the advocate for our youth. I thank you, and that's my time.
Excellent, Vanessa. Thank you so much. So we have time, folks, for one or two questions before we move on to the next panelist.
Hi, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I'd like to thank Vanessa and OBAP. And I mentioned earlier when I spoke that I got involved with aviation because of my son's attendance in a summer program. And it was the OBAP program that introduced my family to aviation. But we've also benefited as a school district. One of your board members has been a faithful volunteer since the last 8 years and coming out and sharing aviation careers with our students. So you guys are definitely a model organization, and just want to thank you for all of your support to the community.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith.
So I have a quick question, Vanessa. You know, given the success of Courageous Conversations and this, what feels like a real pent-up demand to talk about this, any plans for what you might do next in terms of Courageous Conversations, or where you want to take that?
Oh, yes, Ms. Sharon, you know I have plans. Even if I'm leaving and be on the board of advisors, we will have another series of conversations. What we want to look at is if there's going to be another stimulus package, what's happening after the election, and then really weigh in on where we are and what are our next steps in doing this. We need to continue to talk. Everybody needs to talk, and we all need to have a discussion. Whether we agree with each other or disagree, this has nothing to do with us introducing aerospace and aviation to you. And so how do we get past our differences? As a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to speak on unconscious bias. That's why I have to leave. But you know, whether we are conscious or unconscious in our biases, our goals all remain the same. It is about our youth, and it's about career opportunities. It's about funding, and it's about how do we get them to the next level and to be successful in their pursuits and to allow them to dream. We can create dreams to careers.
Terrific. Thank you.
That's a lot of passion there, I know, so sorry.
Nancy, do I see you on because you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. Apparently my background here is not cooperating. I apologize on that. But Vanessa, it's great to see you. You know, obviously I always love our partnership with OBAP. From your perspective, could you, obviously you have lots of great experience with this. If you were to give us one piece of advice as a task force of some big thing, I know there's a lot, but what would you say would be a single greatest hurdle that would be something that we could put our focus on?
And I know this is a big wish or dream for me, Nancy, is resources are limited. And you have all these different organizations. So you guys talked about this one pathway or pipeline for funding, because we can't do the programs without assistance, right? Or partnerships with organizations. So my dream would be that it's not we're not competing in all of our organizations, that we have a pipeline of funding, and I know everybody's not going to receive the equal amount, but let's look at what and who has accomplished certain things and then partner on those. But we create that one pathway so we don't have to look at just sponsorship and maybe the grants that are given, but create a way for us to all go in at the same time and divvy up based on whatever the criteria is, because it's very hard to find and continue to fund these types of programs that we do. But we must reach back into the communities though and ensure, and I guess I'm gonna add another one though, that when we talk about DE&I, when we're talking about diversity, equality, and inclusion, let's really be real about it, okay? Women in aviation, women are doing fantastic things, but there's still a long way to go as well. But when you really look at minorities, that's even a bigger task. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you again, Vanessa. Pleasure to have you.
All right.
All right, our next panelist is Kenneth Morris, the Executive Director for the Aviation Community Foundation, a group that represents more than 30 different youth organizations across the country. Kenneth, happy to have you.
Okay, you should be good to go there. Hey, how are you, Sharon?
Good, so happy to have you.
Likewise, thank you for the invitation. And even from the very beginning, when the task panelists were introducing themselves to task force, it's a phenomenal group of people. So I'm humbled to be a part of the conversation. And I agree, Ms. Jamison, it's going to be hard to follow her, but she was absolutely on point in her assessments and so forth. So when I speak about the Aviation Community Foundation, I'll give you a little background and then we'll jump right into the slides here. And my approach is a little different. I've been in aviation since 1998. It's been a great ride, but my approach to how we diversify aviation is very grassroots. One of the advantages I have is I never had any money. So I'm very resourceful with how I approach getting young people involved. And I do take a different angle as well. Without having the resources of large organizations, I rely on my interpersonal skills, and it has paid off tremendously. Okay, so we'll start. Again, understanding the barriers and needs for successful youth in aviation programs. From the very beginning, my go-to quote, motto, slogan is for our youth to want to be something different, they must see something different. And what that means is where I grew up, we didn't see African-American pilots. We didn't see Latino pilots. We didn't see female pilots, not even pilots, people in aviation. But had I seen that growing up, my thought process probably would have been totally different. Where I grew up, it was either basketball, football, or rap music. Literally, you were going to be an artist or an athlete. And that's what they fed to us through elementary, middle school, and high school. If you didn't get a Division I scholarship to play basketball, you almost felt like a failure. So unfortunately, sports and other outlets are still heavy in the US. And those are the things that we compete with in aviation. Aviation just isn't seen as glamorous. All right, so next slide. So Aviation Community Foundation, again, we're diversity, equity, and inclusion is paramount. Again, when you have funders or investment individuals diversifying their portfolios, they're looking at different ways to increase their revenue and increase their financial standing. And with human resources, it's the same thing. We all have different experiences and different backgrounds and so forth. So not diversifying it just makes no sense to me. So that's what the Aviation Community Foundation is about. Next. We're here to cultivate unity, challenge the status quo, change lives, and create new standards. The old standards, again, they're old. 90% of the industry is white male. I'm not a white male, so it's really hard for me to relate to a lot of the times when I'm in any type of aviation environment, whether I'm flying or not. We may not have the same background. The only thing we can talk about is aviation, and we really don't have those personal. We're not going to talk about politics. We're not going to talk about religion or any of those things. But those are the standards, and those are what is normal now. So why don't we create new standards? And when we say change lives, aviation literally changed my life. Tamara said it earlier. Her entire trajectory changed once she was exposed to aviation and the things that were possible. I completely understand because I was the same way. And challenging the status quo. Again, when you go to any airliner or whatever the case may be, chances are the people that's flying the plane look exactly alike, or not exactly alike, but they look similar to the rest of the industry. So who says that has to be that way? And cultivating unity. At the end of the day, ACF, we're big on collaboration. There are so many silos of excellence working around the country. There are many great programs. To be honest, we don't need any more programs. We have programs everywhere. The problem is we don't collaborate and talk and share resources and really help one another out. If we were to do that, we could come together with our processes of, if you're in California, yes, I know pilots in California that can help you with whatever it is, whether it's a discovery flight or getting into an A&P program or getting into a dispatch or doing an internship. If there was that sense of collaboration, and there, again, someone mentioned it, there is not that one source, but that's where ACF comes in. That's what we want to be, that one hub where if you're looking for anything specific or any type of information or resources for parents, professionals, or the young people, that is what we want to do. That's where ACF wants to bring together everyone. So cultivate unity. That's our biggest thing. Next. And just to give you a little background about myself, I was not always in aviation. Actually, I didn't get into aviation until later in life. Quick story. I went to a high school and I was not the greatest student. Let's just put it like that. Just to be honest, my GPA was right around 2.1. Getting in a lot of trouble, just doing everything that I was not supposed to be doing to be successful. One day I was leaving school, skipping school, which I should not have been doing. And a Navy recruiter was walking in. He didn't try to recruit me for the Navy. He was just talking, being a mentor. And I really appreciated that. I needed that at that time. As I was walking out, we talked. He asked me about how he can, talk to me later. And eventually, it was a great tactic. He ended up recruiting me for the Navy. I studied really hard on the test, the ASVAB. I scored high on the exam, but they thought I cheated because my GPA was 2.1. So they made me take the test again. I scored higher the second time. So when I scored higher the second time, that's how I got access to the aviation industry. There were 6 jobs lined up on the table. I was supposed to be a cook, an operations specialist, a boiler tech. They had jobs that were sitting to the left, but they separated the aviation job. I qualified for it, but they didn't tell me about it. So my inquisitive self said, so what is this job here that obviously I qualified for, but you're not telling me? So it's called Anti-Submarine Warfare Systems Operator. They say it involved a lot of flying, a lot of swimming, and looking for submarines. 90% of the people tried it. They dropped out. They told me to go be a cook. So I took on the challenge. I said, well, I'm going to do that job. I couldn't swim. I didn't know anything about airplanes. I didn't know anything about submarines or anything. So when I took that job and my environment changed, my first time on an airplane was 17, 18, going to boot camp. I'd never been on a plane before. There are no airports around that exposed me to that. So my first time was flying to boot camp. My whole time growing up, I was told when I got on the airplane, I was going to crash and die, that Black people don't fly. So that's what I'm being fed this for 18 years of my life. So the moment I got on the plane, we take off. I'm just waiting at any moment. This plane's about to fall out of the sky, because that's all I know. That's all I hear. Nobody flies airplanes. Black people don't do this. So that is what I'm hearing over and over and over. Then we get to cruise and I'm like, okay, at any moment. And then we landed in Chicago. Uneventful flight I've had since the beginning. So once I got over that fear of falling out of the sky or that unknown of aviation, my entire world changed. I got to the military. I made rank really, really quick. I studied hard. My environment changed. I had a support system of people around me that wanted me to be successful, and the rest has been history. I'm a recipient. I recently graduated from a Department of Transportation program called Forces to Flyers. Forces to Flyers is a program that takes military veterans from 0 hours to their CFI, basically to help the shortage with commercial pilots. I was one of, we only had 7 people get chosen in the entire state of Texas. I was the only African-American chosen there. So for a year, about a year and a half, I'm going through flight training. I never saw anybody look like me the entire time. And I'm an older male. So for younger people, if they were put in my situation, it would be even more difficult. So that's where the representation matters. But prior to going to pursue this full-time flying route, I was the director of education at Lone Star Flight Museum. That's where I learned the business of the nonprofit side. I started my own nonprofit and it was off of pure passion, but I burnt out. I burnt out because I didn't have resources. I didn't have, now the parents were great, the kids were great. I had a passion for it, but at the end of the day, if you don't have resources to keep going, you're gonna burn out, no matter how much passion you have. So I have had the opportunity to I'm a commercial pilot, multi-engine rated, instrument rated. There's no way I would have been able to pay for that training had I not got accepted to this new Department of Transportation program. OBAP was the first to give me a scholarship. They gave me a $2,500 scholarship to start my training. They believed in me first when it came to financing my flight training. And I'm extremely grateful. I cannot say that enough. I tell people all the time, the great work that OBAP is doing, it started me on my journey. And they've done that for many others. So when I took over for ACF, my entire mission was, how do we get people to collaborate? How do we get people to see the value? We don't want to take anything away from what anyone else is doing, but there's strength in numbers. So when we go and approach a large organization, it's not just OBAP by themselves. It's STEM flights, a different point of view, Black Pilots of America, National Gay Pilots Association. The list goes on and on. So that is what the mission of ACF is. And that's my background. And I'll say one more thing about when I put this up. I have an associate's degree. So whenever I go into other rooms with board personnel, one of the things that comes up is my education. I'm a firm believer that trade schools, vocational schools, CTE, they're vital. I wouldn't be able to be a pilot in the military because they would judge me only having an associate's degree. But I led a $40 million flying museum in Houston and had record numbers. So the educational piece is important, but we have to emphasize how important it is to go to that A&P school, dispatch, or whatever that trade or vocational school is. Next. So take a picture. This picture is really important to my family. I typically don't say this in a public forum, but the reason this is important is because we had very little money in this picture, very little. So when you talk about humble beginnings, this is what it looks like. And it's not just my story, we all have a story. Next. And this is the house that I grew up in. So the first aircraft I flew was about $36 million. So growing up in this house with 9 people, I'm not the exception to the rule. I was just blessed with an opportunity to leave my environment and have people come and support me and show me the way. So if you looked at that, you would assume that nothing great would come from that. But I actually lived around the corner from the late, great Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. I grew up in the same neighborhood as she did, right? So there are phenomenal things that came from my neighborhood. And you wouldn't know that just by looking at the house that I grew up in. Next. I'll see if you can find me on this picture. Give you a few seconds. Kind of sticking out, right? So this was that support system. Again, nobody looked like me on the aircraft that I was flying on. But by the time I'd reached this point of flying, this was my family. So where I come from, I hadn't really been around Caucasian people. It was brand new to me. So I had to learn different mannerisms. I had to learn a different way of speaking. It was just completely different for me. And I didn't learn that till 18. But when I tell you that, again, I'm not the exception. I'm not the token. I'm really believe that these young people can be phenomenal, but a lot of the times it's our environment and our support system that derails us. Next. All right. So a little bit about my background. So now we'll go into what we do at ACF. This will be quick. Next. So our purpose, who we serve, and our culture. I really want to emphasize our culture. Again, collaboration. We fly higher together. I'm very fortunate to be on this call with you all. You have done things that I could only dream of. And I'm sorry I didn't catch your name with the test pilot and Miss Joe D'Amato at NBAA. You guys have lived through things. I haven't experienced the things that you have. But when I say we fly higher together, I feel like our experiences and intelligence coming together, we can elevate not only the aviation side, but the human side. Yes, there's a pilot shortage right now, and we're getting ahead of it by coming together with this group of people. But when we think about the long term, I think Ms. Jameson said it best. This is it. You know, this group, and there are a couple others that are doing diligent work, but our culture at ACF is we fly higher together. We don't want to be on the front. We don't have to be the poster child. We want to be in unison with everyone else. And at the end of the day, our focus is helping people and helping our industry. Next. And this is just a little bit of information. So we were in Denver, Colorado. We were founded by Ethan, who is more on the for-profit side, but he has a passion for helping young people and a passion for aviation. And he's a great guy. We have a satellite location in Denver, Colorado. We have a very diverse advisory board and board. So I invite you, if you get a chance, to go look at our website at aviation-community.org. Take a look at our advisory board. That is what we're working to have our industry look like. We have all races. We have males and females from all backgrounds, from Google to Amazon, Clear. We have various people who want to help push our mission, and it's very diverse. So that's what I encourage everyone to look at. All right, students engaged prior to COVID, we had more than 20,000 plus, and then how our programs work. So you can go to the next slide. All right, and phase one, again, it's really straightforward. We do the initial introduction as far as if someone is looking for assistance or how to get into aviation. If you Google how to become a pilot, there are many ways, but there's really no place that gives you step-by-step information in your area. So whether they're in Houston, and I'm from the Houston area, so I'm very familiar with the landscape. So if someone reaches out to me on social media, the first thing we do is we set up a face-to-face and understand, are you doing this because it's a passion of yours? Are you doing this because you're seeing someone else doing it, or you just want to try it? But we look at the human side first. We don't assume that everybody wants to be in aviation. If you're bit by the bug, you love it. But there are other people that have no interest in it. My son, for example. So we connect with the student, we connect with the parents, we invite you out to a local event. A local event doesn't have to be a flying event. In Houston, we have something called Hobby Fest set up at the airport, and it's a free aviation festival. Phenomenal experience. We'll just bring the young people out to that. The parents are really important. Bring the parents out so they can see as well. Because if I get the kid excited at school and the kid is excited and then he goes home and the parent shuts him down, then we just wasted our time. So once we get the parents involved, we get them excited and let them know the opportunities as well, and it's safe, it makes it that much easier. The third phase, again, if they're afraid of heights like I was as a young person, we put them in a simulator. We just show them you're not leaving the ground, but this is what it's going to look like. And if they're ready for the flight, then we'll take them on a flight. Not a problem. And then as we build, we connect them, because that's not our specialty, is creating pilots. But we have an aviation high school here in Houston. We have a HBCU that has an aviation program. We have other facilities that can facilitate that dream. Let us help you connect them. A lot of time, information is power, and having the right connection and having the right network. And one of the things that we like to do is we like to make sure we follow up with our young people. We've had people graduate the program who are now air traffic controllers, mechanics, we have dispatchers, we have pilots, of course, that have all started with us, and now they're graduating the program. And then we have 2 that went to the academies as well. Next. And again, this is what we harp on. It's time for us to come together. Again, we work in so many different parts of the country and different regions. Our entire focus is we've been successful on our own, but can we imagine how much more successful we'll be together? Next. And so since I started, this is just a list of people that I've worked with directly prior to even coming to ACF that are interested in have the same mission. And I'll just give you an example of a couple. The US Coast Guard in Houston literally sent out a request. They'll fly their helicopter from the military base to an inner city school for lunch, where the kids are eating lunch. And here you have this orange and white huge helicopter coming to land in their field. When I tell you, it is mind blowing. They absolutely love it. When they can have an opportunity to meet the pilots that are flying, that care enough to come and just land in the middle of their field. And this is in the inner city. This is not near NASA or anywhere else. Like, these kids are not exposed to it. So we actually have footage of that. That's the Coast Guard. Grateful for the Coast Guard and their willingness to give back to the community. STEM flights is another one. Again, we have a lot here, but STEM flights is another one. They're located in Virginia, but they assist throughout the country in getting those first flights. And not only that, but helping with marketing and helping with setting up meetings. But people aren't aware of these organizations. The Latino Pilot Association, though they're new, they are a force to be reckoned with. Like, the Latino Pilot Association is a phenomenal group. One of the things I learned in Houston is you have to have a bilingual program. My closest assistant, I would go out and do my speeches. And with Houston having such a large Hispanic population, he learned my speeches. And he gave my speeches in Spanish afterwards, but only implementing his experiences from a Hispanic version. And when I tell you, it changed everything. So the parents were more involved because I was speaking in their native language. At first, it was just, how do you not like aviation? You're in Houston, you're by NASA, you have all, but I wasn't, it's the simple things. I wasn't speaking in Spanish so that they could feel comfortable. So once I got the parents involved and they heard a Spanish speaking person tell their story on how great aviation is, completely changed everything. And I didn't even think about that. So when I think about all these organizations, I really, I've worked with them all. I think they're all great. I think they all have the same mission. And I think if we just come together and figure this out, like, how do we move so that everybody's included? Everybody has the same goal and the same mission. I really think we can turn this thing around. Next. Legacy Flights Across America. I'm a board member on Legacy Flight Academy. This was an event of just an example. 5 organizations came together. We flew kids in California simultaneously. We flew kids in California, Texas, Georgia, Virginia, and New York. We simulcast all the flights. So we took the kids flying because we usually have one big event, but due to COVID, we was like, well, we got to keep going. We can't just stop. COVID, okay, you've done your damage, but we're not going to just stop. So instead of having all the kids in one spot, we separated it, and we simulcasted it on social media. So while I was flying in Houston, the kids in New York were probably doing their interviews in California and so forth. So we just simulcasted all of these kids taking flights and meeting with professionals and so forth. And it was a big hit, but that literally didn't cost a lot of money, but it just people working together. So that was a huge opportunity that we will do again. And we would love to have the help of the colleges and other people who can see the vision. Next. Had an opportunity, again, I have an associate's degree. So it was humbling to think that NASA would reach out to me in Houston to help with supersonic and subsonic test flights with their F-18. So I've had an opportunity to connect with their education board, and they sent out a museum in a box, and it's just a great opportunity to connect, and I want to be able to connect them to us as well. Next. I think we should be wrapping up here. Community outreach. As you read these, I'll tell you about this one that I really need to, it's really important that I share with you. The United States Air Force has this new Aim High Flight Academy. They have 120 scholarships for 16-year-olds. They're going to give away 72 solo. They're going to teach basically 0 to solo. And they're going to have 50 more where you're going to get your pilot license for 17. It's just a scholarship that's available and for free. It becomes open November 1st is when the application open. December 1st is when they'll start making their decisions. I want to say February 1st is when they'll start notifying people. And around the March, April timeframe is when they'll start basically getting everything in place so that you know what city you'll do it in. This is so new that there's no website for it. The person that's in charge, I can send the information. His name is Kenny Thomas. He's the president of Legacy Flight Academy, but he's the director of this new Aim High Flight Academy. So if we can't share this information, disseminate it through our people and our resources, I feel like that would be a great disservice to the young people. These opportunities don't come around often. So if you have somebody that's going to invest $10,000 or $12,000 and it's a simple application, as adults, I feel like we're doing a disservice if we don't share that information with them. Next. And that is one of the lovely volunteers at Lone Star Flight Academy, Miss Emily. She's phenomenal. But again, this is what we do. We connect people. We want to make the entire industry better for everyone. Next. Next. Oh, and I'll run through this really quickly. So the biggest things next. So the biggest thing is when you try to attract this generation, they care about what they see. So this is my friend Q. He flies private, but he flies Will Smith. So when I go out to the schools, I show them pictures of celebrities next with pilots. That's what they want to see. Sometimes we overthink it. All they want to see is LeBron James getting off a private jet. And now they're thinking one or two things. I want to work on that jet. I want to be by LeBron. I want to do whatever the case may be. But we overthink it often. And when I go in to speak, we have all these high-level people speaking, and they lose interest because they're not thinking like the child. The child just wants to see what they see on TV. So what I do is I trick them. So I trick them into learning. I trick them into being inspired to be a pilot. If LeBron James flying on his plane, why wouldn't you fly the plane? Next. And being in Houston, Beyonce's from Houston, I got a chance to meet them, and I showed them pictures with me and them, but also showed them an African-American pilot who's flying them. Next. So we have to think about the target audience that we're trying to attract. Kevin Hart as well. So I tell them all the time, Kevin Hart, he became a celebrity, but he's still interested in aviation. They don't know what they don't know. Next. And this is another young guy phenomenal young talent. Again, I feel like I'm not the exception, that there are a lot of young people that can do this. They just have to be exposed. They have to have access, and they have to have a positive mentor, role model coming, showing them the way. Next. So these are things that we've already discussed. We know what the barriers are. We know what the needs are. I just wanted to give my approach from how I address young people. It's very grassroots. Again, I don't have the resources many people have, but if there's anything that I can do to help with this movement, Vanessa knows, Miss Joe D'Amato knows, Sharon knows, the people that know me on this call know I have a passion for this. I absolutely love it. I wish I could do it full time and get paid to do it. I do it every chance I get, which is almost full time, pretty much 5 or 6 days a week. But as we look at this, whatever I can do to help, please let me know. Next. And this is what we leave on. So having aviation be relative to these young people, have them being able to relate, having it look glamorous again. I'm not a social media influencer. I'm really quite an introvert. But when it comes to what's missing, there's a huge gap. And the reason is we're trying to teach them the old way. Things have completely changed. We have to look at a completely different way of approaching them, and we have to meet them where they are to get them where they need to be. I'm adamant about that. The trade schools is a must. Again, I have an associate's degree. I didn't get any college scholarships, but I fly airplanes now. So it's hard for people to connect that. But that is why it's so important. We have to show them what's available. Next. And these are our hurdles, but we're human. So you know what cohesion, continuity, consistency, collaboration, and communication. We can get over these hurdles. We can change this entire thing. No questions asked. Next. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate you listening in, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to be a resource for you, Sharon. Whatever you need, if you call, I'm answering. Whatever I can do to help you all, I'm here. But I'm so grateful that this conversation is being had. And I feel like now it's time a call to action. We have to do something. We don't want to wait for anybody else to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That was awesome. I loved the fact that you brought in, this idea of meeting students where they are, right? And not dictating to them what we think the right solution is. And the bilingual piece too, you're absolutely right. If we're going to touch first generation aviation professionals, we need to talk to their parents in the language that they understand. You're absolutely right. Oh, terrific. Thank you very much. So any questions from the task force members?
Yes, I have some questions, but first, I really enjoyed your presentation, and
thank you.
I think anybody that hears this will be excited about aviation. Your last point there about communication, I think is going to be a huge hurdle for us is how do we get the word out? What have you found to be the most successful means to reach the kids?
For me personally, unfortunately, COVID has stopped all of that. When I'm in front of the kids, it's literally and relating to them, telling my story is quite easy. They're zoomed out now though. So even if I wanted to have a Zoom call with these kids, it's only so long they're going to be able to maintain. So COVID is a hurdle, but I personally feel like as we turn the corner, I can literally be in any city. And so for instance, if you were to come to Houston and want to talk to kids yourself or whatever the case may be, this is what I tell people: do some research on the school first. There are certain students that I'm not going to be able to connect with. That's just natural. And it's not just because of where we come from, but maybe my message doesn't resonate with them. But I'm going to do the research before I go to any school, whether it's in DC or Florida. I look at the city, the streets that surround their school, the street names. I'll mention that street name in my presentation, or I'll mention a store that's in that presentation so that we connect that way. So I think a lot of times, whenever we're speaking to kids, either we don't do the proper research or the background check on them first. And if they're Title I school, they may eat free lunch. I ate free lunch. So those type of things are how I connect with any kid anywhere. I just do the research first on that school or that particular area, and then how do my story relate in any way? So again, COVID is hard because I can't connect with them or see them face to face, and it's only so much I can do via Zoom. But I feel like as we turn this corner, I'll travel anywhere. I flew to Philadelphia for one day for a speaking presentation. and came home the same day. So the things, my shortcomings, if someone else can do it, but that's how I do it. I just see what I can relate to in that particular region or that kid or however it is. For me, that's what works. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think
but we
that's
can talk
great.
more. We can talk more.
Yeah, that I would appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Definitely.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you so much, Kenneth. That was awesome. And I'm sure there are going to be people calling you. Oh, Tamara, do you want to say something?
I just wanted to congratulate Kenny on the work that he's doing. We know that it's not easy. You've pivoted at least 7 times in the last 5 years. Yeah. Honestly, and one of the biggest things that I'd like to ask you your opinion of as I sit on the funding committee is a lot of what the conversation around funding opportunities is to, in general, get youth into careers in aviation. What specifically can you identify as funding areas that underserved communities need money for that youth in general do not necessarily need funding for?
So I actually ran a mentoring program for 5th graders that were getting kicked out of school because of their behavior issues, right? So I'm thinking, how do you kick a 5th grader out? And this is in the inner city. So I took my own money. We had a mentoring program, and I actually would pay them $5 every time they come into class. So this is out of my own pocket. So I gave them something to work towards. So they weren't getting a pilot license because these are 5th graders. So what I figured was we have to give them something to work for. So if you were to donate a sum of money to XYZ company, if it was to my company, I would put that program in the school during the school day. This is not an after school program, and have these young people work towards something, have them give them a challenge. And then if you give them you'd be surprised. $5 to us may not seem like a lot, but these young people were working hard every day because they didn't want to let their family down. They were taking that money home. So it's not the money to pay for flight training, but it's to motivate them to do something else, whether it's, I don't want to say correct their behavior, but they're just more attentive. They don't want to let their family down. And we're not thinking about the human aspect of it. All we're thinking about is jet fuel or going from point A to point B. But when you look at that student, that mentoring program for me is priceless. So that's what I would use it for.
I think you hit something on the head that we've experienced here in Chicago working with inner city youth. Is our most successful program is a program that pays students a stipend.
Yes.
And that is the high school program. When we ran programs without a stipend for high schoolers, they did not enroll.
Exactly.
Because they said they had to go to work, and they are part of the resources that keep the household afloat, if you know what I mean. And so once we get to looking at teaching high schoolers and training high schoolers, I think you mentioned middle schoolers and financial incentives for behavior and for participation. But at the high school level, those financial incentives could literally mean, them having electricity or having a water bill paid, or, just them being able to contribute to the household, knowing that they're spending time away, that they could be gainfully employed, even if it's at Wendy's or McDonald's.
Thank you so much. You are absolutely right.
Yeah, terrific point. Absolutely. If students could choose training or school over having to make money for the household, just another opportunity to transform lives. Terrific.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sharon.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you. I'm sure people will be back to you.
All right, no problem.
Okay. Next up is Elizabeth Tennyson, who is the Senior Director of Communications for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And she's specifically going to tell us about AOPA's high school initiative. Okay, Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And actually, that is an old title from several years ago. So my current title is Executive Director of You Can Fly for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And I don't know if anybody can see the slides, if those are up yet. Super. So I hope some of you are already familiar with You Can Fly. It is a collection of entirely donor-funded initiatives, and the mission really is to get people flying and keep them flying. And we start that at the high school level where people are discovering aviation, but we continue it throughout their journey. So the idea is to always be a resource for people to first become pilots and then to sustain their engagement throughout their lifetime, regardless of what their career path is, although we certainly hope many of them will become pilots professionally. So I'll take the next slide, please. So the first thing I want to say is that Kenneth is an incredibly hard act to follow. That was so motivational, so inspirational, and so moving to me to hear his story. And the great tragedy is that what he said is true. His story is not unique. His personal experience is something that students from many walks of life are experiencing. The very fact that he had so many barriers to entry to even discover that aviation was a possibility. So really, our program is all about breaking down those barriers. We want to make sure that in the future, kids don't have that same experience, that they aren't railroaded into one career or another based on where they come from, or what they look like, or what their family's experience is. So to do that with students, we have developed a 4-year aviation STEM curriculum. This is an in-school class system. It has to be delivered for credit. So these are actually 4-credit courses. The program is very rigorous. It uses scaffolding to build on what's been learned before. And the whole idea is to help students discover aviation career opportunities and then to prepare them for those career opportunities. So whether they go on to a vocational program, a community college, a 4-year university, they're going to have the skills that they need to embark on those kinds of careers. We offer the program in 2 pathways, a traditional pilot pathway and also a UAS pathway. But throughout the program, students also learn about all the other career opportunities that are available to them in aviation. And we really feel that even if you want to go into a different element, say airport planning, or perhaps you want to work in maintenance or be an engineer, knowing the fundamentals of flying is a really good place to start. So it's going to serve them well, no matter what career they ultimately go for. What I think is the most amazing thing about this program is that thanks to our donors, it is completely free to schools. There is no cost to use the curriculum. And it's really designed with an eye to be supported by any school at any level. So you don't have to have expensive simulators, wind tunnels, and equipment to conduct the program. In fact, we try to keep it to between $1,000 and $2,000 a year if you do all of the projects for all of the consumables for a class of about 30. So to give you an idea, some schools that participate do have incredible resources. I have been to schools that have $50,000 wind tunnels. But at the same time, I've been to schools that have very few resources. One of the lessons that we teach our 9th graders is about airfoils. And so they are going to use a box fan, straws, cardboard, and a little piece of plexiglass or Lexan to build a wind tunnel. And then they're going to use a food scale to design their own airfoils and actually measure lift. So this entire project costs less than $50 for a class of 30, or really any size, because the wind tunnel is the main thing. The big expense is a box fan. So you don't have to have all the resources in the world to provide a meaningful, valuable education experience. And that's what the program is about. So a school that signs up to use the program receives absolutely everything they need. They get all the lessons, all the presentations, all the activities, all the projects, and all the assessments for the entire year for whatever course or courses that they are teaching. You do not have to be a pilot. When we were working on initially building this course, one of the things we heard from schools is they didn't have the resources in terms of teachers to necessarily add additional programs. And even worse, they had no idea where to find a pilot to teach these programs. So the whole thing is designed to be taught by any teacher. The majority of our teachers are not pilots. They might be math or science teachers, but we also have music teachers. So it's really just a commitment to being able to bring this to the student, and you can be part of it. We also offer annual teacher professional development, as well as ongoing professional development webinars on a monthly basis. This is very much a career and technical education program. So in that vein, it leads to an industry recognized credential, either the FAA Private Pilot Knowledge Test or the Part 107 drone test. And of course, the second half of the senior year is all about capstone projects. So students have the opportunity to really dig in to an area where they're interested and to really do some research and understand what that career might be like and how they can contribute to it. And then of course, as I said, this is a rigorous program. It is aligned to Common Core standards, also next generation science standards, and where appropriate to the FAA's ACS standards. I'll take the next slide. So reach. This year, we are in more than 460 classrooms at 220 schools. Our largest participating school has more than 350 students in the program. We're in 38 states, and we're serving more than 8,500 students around the country. Next slide. Oh, well, it looks like we lost some text here in translation. So I apologize for that, but what this is meant to show you is that our schools are well divided among types of schools: urban, suburban, and rural. That's what those represent. And the reason we think this is important is because, again, this is really all about lowering barriers to entry. Some of these rural schools that we work with may have 50 kids from kindergarten to 12th grade. And this is a really rare opportunity for them to be able to bring enrichment to their students that they can afford, because they can't afford to invest in other kinds of programs where they have to pay thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for curriculum. So they're able to bring those opportunities to students who otherwise would not have the chance. Next slide. Again, we lost some numbers. Okay, so let me fill this in for you. As you can see, the majority of participating schools are public schools, 82%. But again, we really wanted this to be available to any type of school. So in that small other category, those are primarily homeschool co-ops, where groups of homeschooling parents get together to provide additional enrichment for their students. We also have 5% charter schools and 10% private schools. Next. Okay, so this is really important to me, and it's a subject that is clearly important to this organization as well. These are based on FAA statistics, which again, you can't see that well, and I do apologize, but for 2019, if you take student pilots out of the mix and talk only about certificated pilots, about 5% of the active pilots are female, 95% male. And what's maybe even more alarming than that number is that it's been about the same for a decade. We have not made a lot of headway. A few bumps up and down here and there, but the numbers have been really consistent. I would argue that an important part of that is that young women don't see themselves in these roles, and they don't even know how to get started, even if they wanted to consider an aviation career. But because we reach out to such a broad context of schools and environments, we're also able to reach a lot more young women. So 22% of our students this past year were female, compared to 78% male. Now, that's not where we want to be, but it's an incredible improvement over 5%. And if even a small portion of those young women ultimately go into aviation fields, then we're going to see really significant growth over the coming years. So I'll take the next slide. Thank you. Okay, ethnicity. This is another big one, and it's very, very important to us. We're looking at, according to the Department of Labor, among pro pilots, only 6% are people of color. And again, this is not a number that has improved much in the past decade. But among our students, 38% are people of color. So we look a lot more like the country. And that's what we want to see for aviation. We want to see the aviation community look a lot more like the country that it both represents and serves. I'll take the next slide. This too, you know, when we talk about reaching underserved audiences or people we haven't reached in the past, lowering barriers to entry, there are a lot of ways to look at that. And the economics of this are very significant. I think we heard that from several people today, that you know, even if you are fortunate enough to win scholarships, you might not have enough money to learn to fly. But even before that, students need to know that regardless of where they come from or what their personal economic situation is, there are incredible career opportunities for them, whether they do want to learn to fly or whether they want to go into maintenance or engineering or any of the other many, many wonderful fields. And so we had 27% of the schools this past year were considered high poverty schools by the Department of Education. And that means that 75 to 100% of those students receive free and reduced meals. So again, this is another way that we're reaching out to communities that have traditionally not really been part of aviation, haven't seen themselves there, and really haven't known that there are opportunities. Next slide. So there are a couple of other things I want to mention about the program. In addition to the curriculum itself, something I don't have a slide on, but I do want to tell you about is scholarships, because this is clearly important for this group. We are privileged, thanks to our donors, to give away more than $1.2 million in scholarships every year. The vast majority of them are for $10,000. The idea being that that is enough in most parts of the country for you to actually go get a private pilot certificate. But of course, the conversation came up earlier, is it enough? It's never enough. As much as we love giving away money and helping students, individuals fly, we also know that we can never, ever have enough money to get everybody who wants to and can't afford it into the air. So that's where we depend on the broader community, and we depend on programs like the high school program to be able to give kids opportunities to reach out beyond just what we can provide in scholarships and find out about what else is out there for them. We also offer an annual high school aviation STEM symposium. Normally these are held in person. This year, obviously, like everybody else, we had to shift gears. So we will be having a virtual event on November 17th. You can register for that, it's free. So you can register on the AOPA website, aopa.org. We have panels of aviation industry experts. We focus on how to create or grow an aviation STEM opportunity for high school students. Obviously, we talk about our curriculum, but that's not all it's about. Let's say you just want to dip your toe in the water and add some aviation content to a physics class. We'll help you do that as well. You can also sign up to use the program. Next year, we're looking forward to seeing you in person in Orlando, November 14 through 16. So I hope you'll save the dates and we'll see many of you there. Take the next slide. Okay, so we have talked a lot about the challenges. And I think Kenneth said very eloquently about the need for collaboration and cooperation. We do think that there is an opportunity right now, unique in our history, to be able to support some legislation that would create a forum for that collaboration. It's called the National Center for the Advancement of Aviation. It was introduced in both the Senate and the House this year, and it was sponsored by a bipartisan group of senators and representatives, Senators Inhofe and Duckworth, and of course, Representatives Carson, Young, and Larson. The whole idea of this legislation is to support aviation and aerospace STEM curriculum development and deployment so that we can expand, not just AOPA, but everybody, the reach into these communities that we haven't reached before. Also to support aviation workforce development across all careers, not just flying, not just UAS, but maintenance technicians and everybody else. economic and safety data analysis, so that we can all share that information and have it available to all of us, because it really informs how we teach, what we share, where we go next. And then of course, a forum for cross-industry collaboration. And the intent is not just organizations like AOPA, but manufacturers, government, the military, everybody there together. If we can bring all of these pieces together inside one organization, then we really have an opportunity to magnify our efforts, so that we're not, as I think it was Brett who said, we're not reinventing the same wheel again. Take the next slide, please. So just for those of you who may not be familiar, these are the organizations that have signed on to support this legislation so far. We hope there will be many more. And I'm going to leave it there and take questions.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Great presentation. Do you know, are you able to track the students who go through your high school curriculum? Do you know how many of them end up, not necessarily even being pilots, but just even pursuing sort of the next step in terms of aviation education at the tech, either at a technical school or at a four-year institution?
So we haven't been around long enough yet to have students graduating in the program. We are field testing our 12th grade curriculum right now. So at the end of this 2021 school year will be when we first know. Now we are able to survey through the schools, but as you all know, privacy requirements and so forth make it difficult or impossible for us to directly access the students. But while they're in school, we do ask for information about whether or not they're flying, whether or not they've taken a written exam, all those kinds of things. And then as they graduate, we ask for information from their teachers about what their plans are. So do they plan to pursue an aviation career? Are they on their way to an aviation program at a university? So we do expect to have all that data to the best of our ability. We cannot drill down to the individual student level. No one knows that better than you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very frustrating, isn't it?
It is.
All right, other questions? Brett, I see you're on. I'm thinking you have a question.
Yeah, it's really cool. You pop up with your video. It kind of is a nice warning that you're raising your hand. You're doing a good job managing it, Sharon. So I actually, Elizabeth, just wanted to add and show AOPA great thanks for its leadership. In addition to the legislative effort to establish the National Center for Aviation, which ARSA has been involved in, AOPA also has worked a lot on the establishment with the FAA of the two workforce development grant programs that are both being piloted. One is for pilots, one is for maintenance technicians. And it's a relatively humble amount of money to start, $5 million total for pilots and $5 million total for technicians, to be handed out under slightly differently structured programs for the technicians versus the pilots, but in grants up to $500,000 that require, and again, it's a little bit different between the pilots and the technicians, but some type of local community collaboration. And ARSA, my colleague Christian at ARSA has done a lot of work on the technician side. AOPA has taken the lead on behalf of the pilots. After a lot of effort by the FAA and industry pushing them along, we finally are on the verge of some notice of funding opportunities, which we expect in mid-November. So I encourage anybody who would like more information to seek it out, but certainly if you're in a position where you're doing some kind of collaborative work that's really focused at the local community level, that those resources could be really invaluable in terms of being able to provide, stipends for students in transitioning programs or increasing scholarships for individuals looking for flight training. So beware of those resources, and obviously both AOPA and ARSA have more information for those seeking it.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Brett. That's incredible, and we are so grateful to the FAA for its work in moving this forward, because these grants, I hope every penny of it will be awarded. $500,000 can make a huge difference in a program, especially one that's maybe just getting started. And for all of those funds, we're going to see more young people get involved in aviation and ultimately fill this workforce pipeline, which we know, although it's temporarily depressed, I think temporarily is really the operative word. We've had a shortage, and we will have a shortage again here probably very soon. So.
Yes, go ahead, Sid.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for all of that great information. So you were talking about the curriculum for the high school students. Just wanted to know, has there been any conversation about developing or creating a curriculum for younger students?
So that he's not even taking the dogs over there.
Yes, go ahead. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for all of that great information.
Okay, so Sid, thank you for that question. There has been conversation about it, but I have to tell you, some of you are educators. If you have developed curriculum intended to be used on a national scale, you know how hard it is. This has been an effort in which our donors have generously invested millions and millions of dollars. So we are really strongly committed to getting this on its feet and in many more schools before we turn our eyes towards middle school or others. There's a huge need there. And I know many other organizations are doing some really incredible things in that space. I would love to be able to be involved there. But as I tell my team, not this week, because first, we got to finish these 4 years of curriculum and make sure that they really are, that awareness is there and that they really are accessible to schools all over the country. And that's a heavy lift on its own. So.
You're definitely right. But I would definitely encourage you all to keep it in the back of your minds as you are continuing to move forward to have that curriculum in the earlier years.
I promise that it is. And it's not in the back of our minds, it's in the front. We just can't do it right now.
All right, early intervention, I can't say it enough, is really the key.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brian?
Yeah, Elizabeth, great presentation. I've had an opportunity to speak at length with Cindy Hasselbring, who I know you know well.
Yes,
and,
indeed.
We started up through the Aviation Technician Education Council, which represents the 181 maintenance schools in the country. We started, kind of spun off an organization called Choose Aerospace, and that is a nonprofit organization. And one of the things that we want to do is similar to what you've done, but really focused in aviation maintenance, in creating a FAA general curriculum that would be able to be credited and able to be transferred to the 181 schools after high school. And this would allow students to get the general curriculum done while they're in high school in a very structured fashion, meeting, all the academic requirements, that obviously are required for Part 147. But I think in combination with what you're doing, I'd sure love to talk to you about what that might look like, as we work together to create both, it sounds like you've got a very good, and I know you do, a good pilot and UAS pathway in high school, but we would love to add that maintenance component. And we've gotten a lot of work with Delta Airlines and others that have been helping us along the way. But I definitely see some similarity of what Choose Aerospace is doing as well.
We would love to see that come to fruition, Ryan, and I'd be more than happy to talk with you offline or as part of the, this organization or any way at all to support that effort. We definitely need that. One of the things that we've learned in this process, and again, I think many of you who are educators may have had this experience, certainly probably David has had this. And by the way, David, thank you so much for talking about our curriculum when you introduced yourself. David teaches the AOPA curriculum at the high school level as well. But one of the things that we've learned in this process is that while you would think there was one way to go about this, there is not. So one of the great challenges is recognizing that every state, every school district, and sometimes every school has to really be approached and handled individually. So that is one of the great challenges. We've talked about awareness and we've talked about barriers to entry. That is one of the really great difficulties in developing and distributing a curriculum, whether it's for maintenance or for piloting, because every one of those steps has to be handled completely individually. But I look forward to talking to you more about it and seeing if we can't help each other out.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Appreciate you being here. And I'm sure there are going to be folks who are going to be reaching back out. I can already tell.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you so much to the task force. And please don't hesitate to contact me. I am happy to talk with anyone and everyone about these really important issues.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, up next, Dr. Rebecca Ludy, Associate Professor at the University of Nebraska Omaha Aviation Institute, to present her workforce report on women in aviation. Becky.
Thank you very much. Dr. DeVivo, thank you so much for having me as a part of the panel today, and specifically for highlighting women in aviation and the research. I am an associate professor at UNO. I do research on specifically the outreach, recruitment, and retention of women in aviation. I also do serve on the Women in Aviation Advisory Board as a subcommittee chair with the chair for the group of understanding the problem and industry trends. So to Ryan Gertson's point earlier today, yes, there's some similarities in what we're doing. And I know that many of the other members, by the way, of the board are watching and observing. I know this because we're texting each other with how excited we are about your comments and the work that you all are doing. And I do look forward to having some meetings between the subcommittee chairs in the future. I believe we have that scheduled for the end of October. So I think there definitely is a little bit of overlap. At the same time, I'm going to tell you, I think overlap is not a bad thing, because if it's something that the Women in Aviation Advisory Board is seeing as a problem or a challenge, and the Youth in Aviation Task Force is seeing as a problem and a challenge, it's probably a problem and a challenge. So I think that's okay. But let's talk more about women in aviation outreach, recruitment, and retention. Next slide, please. So one of the first areas when I started in this work was, first of all, we know the numbers of women in aviation haven't moved much, but where are the greatest gaps? What are those numbers? So if we want to increase the numbers, move that needle, we need to know where we're starting from. So that led to the Women in Aviation Workforce Report, which really was an attempt to try to figure out what some of those numbers are in a wide variety of fields in aviation. So this was an effort that was done in cooperation with Women in Aviation International, University of Nebraska, Omaha, and funded by the NASA Nebraska Space Grant. Next slide. So here's the numbers. We know that women make up about half the workforce in the US, and we know that women are seriously underrepresented in aviation. So what you're seeing here is a summary slide of all the different data points that are in that report. So for every occupation on the right side of your screen there, there is a data point specifically on the number of women in aviation in that field within the report. But what I really want to highlight are the 3 areas of greatest gender gap, and that include women in leadership positions, pilots, and maintenance technicians. Next slide. So I'll run through some of those numbers for you. I'd be remiss as the data research person in here if I don't throw a bunch of statistics at you. I feel like I wouldn't be doing my job. So the greatest area of gender gap in the entire workforce report is in the area of maintenance. So aircraft mechanics, only 2.4% women. So we clearly have a lot of work to do in that area. Dispatchers, 19%, air traffic controllers, 19%, aerospace engineers, 13%. Next slide. Airport managers, just shy of 17% women. Aerospace workforce, 24%. Aviation higher education faculty, folks like myself, 21% women, and cybersecurity, 11%. I do also want to mention, by the way, that the University Aviation Association tracks the numbers of enrollments. And I can tell you that as a board member of the UAA, we are seeing increases in enrollments in aviation programs. Even this year, the University of Nebraska at Omaha, for example, has again another fall of increased enrollments. We did last year, we did the year before. So, and I'm also happy to say that our number of women in our flight program are about triple the number of pilots that are women in the industry. So let's look at that number a little more in detail. Next slide. Women pilots, as we've heard some of the statistics already, about 7% of all pilots are women. 5% of airline pilots are women. We have an even smaller number, though, when we talk about moving women from the right seat to the left seat. Approximately 1% of all airline pilots are female captains. And when you really dig into the data a little bit more, we can look at some of the specific issues and challenges as well. For example, one of the challenges is that women have a lower conversion rate from student pilots to private pilots as compared to men. In addition, we know that these numbers represent even greater gaps for women of color. Sisters of the Skies, a fantastic organization, tracks the statistic that less than 1% of all airline pilots are Black women. Next slide. So once you know where the gaps are, the next part of it for me was, how do we know how to do outreach in a way that meets up with what we know about what draws women into aviation? So that led to a survey of women in aviation, again conducted in partnership with Women in Aviation International, with over 1,000 respondents, to find out things like what are the factors and what's drawing women in. So this is an important number for, I think, all of us to keep in mind. Outreach, we know, is essential. 54% of the women surveyed said being introduced to aviation as a kid influenced their decision to pursue a career in the field. Next. And the influencers. We've talked about the influencers today, and I'm really glad to see that as a topic. I can tell you a little bit about what the data shows. First of all, yes, parents are influencers. What great news for those of us who are parents, right? So yes, we still have influence on the kids and their decisions. So 55% of the women that were surveyed said that their parents positively influenced their decision to pursue aviation as a career. So we know that's a factor. We need to think about how well informed these influencers are on information like pathways. So for example, on the parent side, I don't know if any of you have seen, there's a Facebook page out there called Raising Aviation Teens, I believe is the name of it. I'm a part of it. I'm raising an aviation teen. And it's an interesting Facebook page to me, because from the research standpoint in particular too, but also because I think it shows that parents are looking for a community of support. They're looking for information. Part of my concern here is that they're getting that information through social media. So keep that in mind as well. The EAA Women Source survey that was done also showed that friends and family members who are already in aviation are big influencers. And I think this third point is also important to consider. High school counselors are not influencers. 84% of the respondents on the Women in Aviation survey said high school counselors had no influence. But the bigger concern is that when they did have an influence, it was more negative than it was positive. So that is definitely a concern. That is by no means a criticism on counselors, by the way. I think it really is an indication that as an industry, we need to do a better job informing those influencers. We need more Sid Smiths in the world, and those who are informed about aviation as a career field. Another area, by the way, of influencers that was talked about was mentors. Mentors actually did not play a big role as influencers in the Women in Aviation survey. However, there was a call throughout the survey. The results showed that women wanted more access to mentors. Next slide, please. This data point I'm really excited about. This is relatively new, right out of a very recent EAA Women Source survey. So I've heard this question come up earlier. What is the right age for women in aviation? That we now have an answer to that. This was a survey that was done by EAA, again, targeted to women interested in aviation. This had over 3,000 respondents. And what we know is this: you've got to get them interested before age 20. 64% of the respondents became interested in aviation before the age of 20. And the largest category, as you can see here, is younger than 10. So it's really important that we think about youth outreach in these age groups. Also noted at the bottom there, 41% of the female pilots who responded to the survey said they started flight training between the ages of 16 and 20, even further supporting this under 20 age group emphasis for us. We heard this a lot this morning too, right? Even in the introductions, and Casey and Tamara and others talking about the age at which they started. So thank you all in your introductions. You essentially supported the data point for me. I appreciate that. So, next slide. I think one of the key areas that I really wanted to find out in the survey was this: what draws women into aviation? Because we need to think about what we're doing in terms of outreach and awareness and make sure it matches up to what it is that's bringing young people in this case, young women in. So for this survey question, there were over 29 factors that the respondents were asked about. And these were the top 5. I love this top 5, right? It's passion for aviation, perceived as an adventurous profession, fun profession, desire to prove personal abilities, and desire for a challenging career. So you can kind of hear the whole outreach awareness campaign coming out, right? The excitement and the fun of aviation. Notice what's not on this list: monetary reward and STEM. So I really think that we need to think about how we do outreach and awareness. The concern a little bit here is that if we filter outreach and awareness first as STEM and then as aviation, then we may actually miss part of the target market. As Dr. DeVivo said in her opening comments today, in fact, in as early as junior high, girls tend to start self-selecting out of STEM and STEM coursework. And I think one of my favorite quotes on this topic is from Heather Penny, who's chair of EAA Women SOAR. And she said, the concern here is what the message that we don't want to send is that if you're not interested in STEM, aviation's not interested in you. So we really need to think about that. I am by no means promoting we walk away from STEM. So let me be clear on that. It is important to focus in that area. And quite frankly, that's where a lot of the funding is, including grant funding. But I think that we really need to think about how do we package it? So as an example, just this week on Twitter, I saw a post by an aviation organization that said we need to get more young women interested in STEM so that we can get more women in aviation. And what I'm saying is we might need to think about flipping that around. We need to get more young women interested in aviation through this message, the excitement, the adventure, the fun, and that will increase the number of women in STEM. Next slide. So another important area to think about as we're trying to both recruit and retain women in aviation is what are the barriers? This was asked in a variety of different ways throughout the survey. No matter how it's asked, the same big 3 emerge as deterrents to our ability to recruit and retain women in aviation. And those top 3 are cost, which we've talked about quite a bit today. Now, do you have a whole subcommittee working on that? Workplace culture, the male-dominated workplace culture and the bias that exists in it. It's a thing, and it's a deterrent to our ability to recruit and retain women. In fact, it was the #1 deterrent in our ability to retain women, according to the survey. And then #3 of the big 3 is the issues surrounding family, life, and work balance. So those are the 3 big barriers. Additional barriers that were raised in the survey include things like training-related issues, access to CFIs, flight schools, etc. And again, this lack of support, which comes back to the mentorship issue. Next slide. I want to also share a little bit of research I've done in the area of outreach itself. So one of the other processes in this journey of research for me is, find out where the gaps are, find out what the message we need to send is, and whether that is in sync with what's drawing women into aviation and what's making them want to stay. And then third, what does good outreach look like? So that was the point of doing the aviation outreach model. This was developed by reviewing outreach in a variety of areas and fields and identifying what are the essential elements of good outreach. So this is the model here, but this is like skimming the surface. So in addition to the outreach model, there's actually a gap analysis that goes along with this and a checklist, of course, pilot. If I can add a checklist anywhere in research, I'm going to do that. So there's also a checklist that goes with this that has items under each one of these 5 areas. And the idea behind that is that can be used to examine a current outreach effort or to help develop new outreach efforts to make sure that we're addressing these essential elements. So let me just quickly kind of discuss a couple of these and talk about how this was applied to some examples. So preparation, identifying the problems, contact, identifying that target group, in addition, the age group, doing age appropriate outreach, Engaging, which is the actual activity, considering the environment. Another one I'm going to throw in here, by the way, is that every outreach activity is going to have some element of the need for a safety evaluation, particularly when we're working with youth. So that's in the checklist as well, thinking about the environment that it's happening in and what are the potential threats to safety, regardless of the activity. The one I really want to focus on, though, is sustain. Sustain is really all about how do we sustain the momentum. So we bring a kid in, get them on a flight, have them do an in-class activity, whatever it is. You get that young person really excited about aviation. This is where that pathway becomes so essential. They've got to leave that experience with information on next steps. What is the pathway? And how can they capitalize on that excitement in order to further themselves along on their goals? And then last but not least, I heard somebody say the word outcomes today. I think it was Ryan Gertzen. And I was really excited to hear that word come up. So it's always an important element is evaluating the program itself. And this is, again, where the researcher in me will come out. I think research is an important element of all of these areas. How do we know if we're moving the needle? First of all, if we don't keep measuring the needle and where it's at. And how do we know the impact that specific programs are having if we're not measuring outputs in terms of how many kids are reached, for example, but in particular outcomes in terms of how do we change behavior, have we changed behavior? And as Elizabeth said so well, that's by far the greatest challenge is measuring outcomes. But I think it's worthy of the effort to explore and examine because we need to know how successful we are in the programs that we're doing and, you know, really to help us spend our resources in the most efficient way possible. So those are some of the elements of the outreach model. As I mentioned, there's a full checklist that goes with this. This was actually applied to review 3 different aviation outreach initiatives, outreach programs. As a result of that review, all 3 were identified as best practices in aviation outreach. And those included the AOPA High School Initiative, Women in Aviation's Girls in Aviation Day, also a best practice. And I don't know if anyone got to, or how many of you were able to see what Women in Aviation did this year going virtual. But because of COVID, we've all had to think a little bit differently. And Girls in Aviation Day went virtual through the use of an app, which is ongoing, which you can all check out. And through that, they were able to really extend their geographic reach. I think they had 15 countries participate last year. This year, they had participants from 55 countries. So it was an opportunity to do something new and resulted in even wider outreach. So Girls in Aviation Day was the second best practice. And then the third that was identified in the research was EAA Young Eagles. As a longtime EAA member, in addition to Women in Aviation and AOPA and OBAP and others, but as a longtime EAA member, I'm a big fan of the Young Eagles program, but they are a great example in particular of sustaining the momentum because you leave that flight experience with a code, for example, to be able to go and do an online ground school and information about a first flight lesson. And they're also an example of something that I heard Dan Elwell comment on early this morning. And he talked about effective partnerships, for example, between nonprofits and industry. And the EAA Young Eagles just recently announced that they are now sponsored by the United Aviate program. So again, an industry nonprofit effective partnership that also extends that pathway and that's sustaining the momentum even further. So some great examples out there. One more effective partnership I want to mention too is AAR and the work they're doing to address, again, that greatest gender gap in aviation, which is aviation maintenance. And that is their work with the Lumina Foundation, reaching out to A&P schools, for example, and making an effort to do a group hire of 20 women for a particular shift at an AAR facility, and then having the opportunity to explore how that will help address increasing the numbers of women in aviation, but also some of the barriers that we have looked at in the research as well. So I'm excited about that one too. Next slide, please. So just some final thoughts to kind of wrap all this up. When it comes to outreach and awareness, we know it needs to be age appropriate, and we know that we need to figure out who that target market is. One thing I have learned from doing outreach research is this. It's really important, clearly, to get the word out about awareness, but I'm convinced that outreach has to include an element of empowerment. It's not just that this career field is out there, it is absolutely that this career field is within your reach and you have the ability to do it. And I also fully support that that can be enhanced by using the see it, be it mentality. People need to see someone that looks like them in that position. I think we need to certainly consider outreach, not just to youth, but we need to do outreach to the influencers. Make sure the parents are getting the proper information, teachers, and certainly high school counselors as well. Sustaining the momentum should be an emphasis in what we do. That's that pathway area that I know you are all focused on. And it's very important that we get that information out on what those pathways are for a variety of career fields. Particularly for the barriers for women in aviation, we've got to continue an industry focus on those big three. Cost, which arguably is not gender specific as a barrier, family work-life balance policies, and developing an inclusive workplace culture. We need to develop workplaces that work for everybody. It's one thing to do all this work and bring youth into aviation, but when you do that and we're not taking the steps to retain, that's a concern. And as an example of that, the Women in Aviation survey showed that just over 30% of the women that responded to that survey said that they had thought about leaving aviation. We need to focus on diversity in faculty, flight instructors, and leadership. Again, see it, be it, and having a diverse group of people at the decision-making tables. And lastly, developing a community of support. This is a variety of everything from the Facebook pages that we've seen and we've talked about to mentorship programs, sponsorship, and not just a community of support for our case in terms of women supporting women, but male mentors and male sponsors play a very huge role here as well. I certainly want to acknowledge that. So developing a community of support is also an essential element. So that wraps it up for me. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of the conversation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Becky. This is incredible work. I think this is going to be really helpful for the subcommittees, and I'm sure we have questions. Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
I was really impressed with your work. It's great stuff. Congratulations. Could we get access to the full study? That would be interesting to read.
Oh, absolutely. Certainly. I meant to mention that. I will put a link in the chat that can link you to all the different studies that were referenced.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Anybody else? Tamara.
Becky, I was curious to know if you guys or if any organization is partnering with the Sisters of the Skies to collect survey data from them specifically. As you well know, while 5% of airline pilots are women, only less than 0.5% of airline pilots are African-American female. So they don't even make up a percentage point, which means that when you state stats about women in aviation and women in pilot jobs, their voices are not even showing up as a blip on the radar in those survey outcomes. So I'm interested to know if you're reaching out directly with Sisters of the Skies. There are over 125 African-American female airline pilots in the country right now. And I'm curious to see if they were surveyed as a subset of women in aviation, how would those survey results stack up to the overall group of women pilots, which are majority Caucasian. And I would be interested to see if finances and the cost or the lucrative pay for aviation as a career would show up in that top 5.
Yeah, that's an outstanding point. I appreciate that point. I am on the hunt for that data. So I am currently in the progress of actually reaching out to individual organizations, additional organizations that represent other underrepresented groups, specifically for that purpose. Exactly, because what women in aviation experience as a response to that survey is going to be different than Sisters of the Skies, NGPA, Latino Pilots Association, Professional Asian Pilots Association. And in turn, they are all going to hear from me. So I think I appreciate your comments, because that inspires me to continue on that path. So thank you.
Well, and please feel free, Becky, to pass that information along to us as well when you feel ready.
Happy to, yes.
That would be great. Thank you. Anybody else? Terrific. Thank you very much. And good luck with your own Women in Aviation Advisory Board membership.
Thank you.
Okay, last but certainly not least, we have Stephanie Ward, who's the manager for aviation planning at Mead and Hunt, and her report for the Airport Cooperative Research Program on developing pathways to aviation careers. Stephanie.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Well, you know, usually when I make a presentation, I'm often standing between the group in lunch or the group in the bar. Here, I find myself actually just saying it's already been said. You know, with the presentation, if the slide deck's coming up, I'm not seeing it. There we go. The project that we did, all I've had for the past 4 hours is ooh moments, as I'd call them, in that, ooh, yeah, we covered that, and ooh, yeah, we found that too. So this is probably going to be a recap that you're going to go, yeah, we've already talked about that. The project that we did for ACRP stemmed from coordination with the Airports Cooperative Research Program, reaching out to the National Association of State Aviation Officials, NASAO. And this was the highest ranking topic that the 50 state directors identified as being a concern for them as state directors, is that we need to figure out how do we get our next generation of pilots and other aviation professionals. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Next slide. You know, one of the things that we looked at was, you know, all the headlines that everybody else is seeing. Next slide. And, you know, we've all seen it, you know, the pilots, technicians, it's all been talked about today, even now trickling down into, you know, drone pilots, you know, specifically targeting them as separate. So that was our background of, we know we've got this education or workforce gap, and what do we do about it? So next slide. We were specifically tasked with looking at an age group, as has been discussed today, between the ages of 10 and 25 was our target market. And we were really challenged with not only making it, how do we get people involved and educated regarding opportunities for careers, but also how do we use aviation in business situations, as well as just for recreational purposes. So we kind of had a three-pronged approach of what were we trying to look at as we reached out for information on this research topic. Next slide. As has been discussed, one of the things that we heard time and time again was that make that distinction that it goes well beyond just being a pilot. Not that we don't need the pilots, but there's so much more diversity in terms of the aviation careers out there that we need to explore. And so very interesting to hear Dr. Ludi make the comment about the counselors being involved in that conversation as far as influencers. We heard that from a number of entities, in that the response was, when we asked those questions, they couldn't articulate other careers other than pilots when the term aviation came up. So when we asked the question, you know, what would you recommend to somebody who said, I'm really interested in aviation? Pilot was about the only thing that they could come up with. They weren't really able to connect to airport managers or airline staff or all the other host of careers that are out there. So that led us to development. The next slide, please. A summary of trying to connect those dots. And I apologize, you can't read it very well on the slide, but this is a graphic straight out of the report, where what we've done is on the left-hand column, tried to indicate a number of the different types of careers that could be out there. And we've organized them around basically 6 different areas: flight, control, manage, maintain, design, and operate. And they cross everything from manage an airline, an airport, an FBO, et cetera, to operating, same thing, aircraft operators, FBOs, line service, airports, trying to show the entire gamut. You know, even when, you know, what I do, you know, I'm involved as an airport planner for a private consultant. So, you know, that's a private consultant. And when we look at it, the top Across the top of the slide, you'll see airlines, airports, FBOs, corporate flight departments, consultants, federal and state agencies, and manufacturers. We're trying to demonstrate here's a number of different potential employers that when you drill down could possibly be where these careers are going to exist. And you can see some of them cross every single category, that we've got opportunities across every one of those. One of the things that I speak quite frequently at a couple of the AAA East student chapters here locally in the state of Michigan. And one of the things that we've had a conversation there, and I love that Dr. Ludy's research showed a desire or a passion in aviation. That's one of the things that we talk about a lot when I've been in those student conversations, is that if you've got a passion about something in addition to aviation, let's make that connection. A young woman I was speaking to last fall, she said, well, I really love to do marketing, but man, I really love airports. And I said, why not connect the two? You know, as an airport, at an airport as an example, you know, there's marketing staff who are sending the message out. At the airlines, they need it. So again, you can kind of connect those dots across all those employers that you could combine those two passions to make, you know, a career. And so that's what an important element of this study really focused on, was the fact that there's way more things out there besides the pilot careers, and that we need to make those connections. Next slide, please. We also, as you've discussed here for the previous part of the presentation or the meeting, is, you know, how do we get them exposed? And what we were pretty excited about was seeing just the diverse opportunities that are already out there happening today. One of our researchers who was a part of the project, Dr. Kim Kenville out of UND, made the comment that we have pockets of greatness, we just don't have them connected. And I thought that was a pretty profound statement. And, you know, it's been discussed here today that we've got all these great things happening, you know, school tours, we've got flights, we've got clubs, we've got workshops and camps, all of them happening in different communities, but we don't have that connectivity to get that information out to the greater community so they know that that is happening. And we also don't then have that pathway. So we identified as that being a concern. And if you go to the next slide, please. That's one of the recommendations out of our guidebook, is connecting those pathways. What we were looking at was, quite honestly, probably at the more local level. It's exciting for me to listen to the conversations that's happened today about how do we do that at a national level to create those. And you'll see here that, you know, we took it right down, as has been discussed, to the elementary school level of how do we get that initial exposure? Is it camps? Is it tours? Is it people coming in to speak to kids? How do we spark that interest at the elementary school level, and what form and fashion? Continuing that interest into the middle school age groups, where we continue it with camps or activities, possibly the school curriculum, as Elizabeth was discussing. Creating to our step 3, which is then, you know, a pathway to a career. So then how do we really start to gel all that together at the high school level with actual school curriculum or aviation focused high schools, possibly scholarships, or continuing even just those after hours activities such as camps, tours, maybe internships, et cetera. Leading us then to a program, as we've called it, so the post-secondary, and not necessarily a 4-year degree, has been discussed. Like I said, another one of those moments, that it doesn't have to be a 4-year degree, that there are a number of other opportunities and paths to get these students to those spots where they need to be that don't necessarily require that 4-year degree. So really trying to say the whole gamut that's out there. And then how do we then continue and connect them then to get them actually employed as a professional in one of those categories and get them into the pipeline? And then one of the elements that we thought was really important too was then number 6, which is then giving it back. So how do we then get them so that they help contribute, much like all of us on the call today who are passionate about this topic? How do we get them involved so that they're engaged in the aviation industry, either in clubs or organizations, either at the local, state, national level, and contribute back? How do we get them to contribute financially to scholarships, to donations, endowments, et cetera? And then how do we get them to volunteer, both at the individual level of maybe helping with one of these activities, as well as at a national level of providing their time? So there's a number of elements in the guidebook that talk about this and about creating this full circle pathway. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the other things that we found, and it's been demonstrated, I think, here today, you know, one of the great things, and I think also the challenging things with the aviation industry is we have so many organizations that are involved in this industry. In the guidebook itself, we talked about 32 that we considered to be at the national level. And this was federal agencies, national trade organizations, national youth organizations, 32. How do you connect those 32? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I lost count, I think, after 10 earlier this morning about additional agencies or groups that were talked about that I know that we didn't capture in this research, that are out there that are providing some form of connectivity to education and student involvement that need to be brought together. And then that's not even beginning to touch the realm of state agencies, local agencies that are out there. So too many for us to catalog. And so that really led us to the next slide, please. Our finding that there really does need to be some sort of national database, some sort of connectivity. And so what we tried to do with our guidebook was jumpstart that. And so what we developed was a 100, what we called landing pages. Can't have something without having it tied to aviation, right? A landing page of 100 different aviation education events that were currently taking place. If you go to the next slide, please. What we've done with that is in our research, we were reaching out to these different groups. Some of the groups we talked with had more than one activity, and so they might be reflected in the 100. And what we tried to do is catalog that information across a number of different points, if you will, so that way somebody who would use the document would be able to say, well, I have a limited funding ability, or I have a limited staff. So I'm going to query these 100 events to look at, what can I do with part-time staff or volunteer staff? And you'll see in the middle of the page there on the right-hand side, that's a snapshot of one of our landing pages. You can see where it says staff, we've got FT. So this in particular example, they have full-time staff dedicated to it. And you read the rest of the grouping, that's because it's a high school aviation course. So it's a dedicated teacher who's teaching this course. But you'll see on the left-hand side, a number of the pieces, data points that we've included is, what's the target age of these different activities? What's the duration? What's the cost? So we've cataloged a number of those pieces. And then in the report itself, we also have given some real estate to discussing what types of activities or additional considerations do you need to have to dig deeper, like what kind of equipment do you have to have? Do you have to have additional insurance? If you're having a day-long event, have you thought about food, the marketing, restrooms, parking, things that can really make a difference in the success of a program? A great example is one of the EAA chapters that we talked to said, we had planned this event and everything went off without a hitch. The only part we had not thought about was the fact that we were using a hangar facility for the event, and we were going to use the restrooms that were in the airport terminal, and there were limited rooms or restroom stalls. And so we spent an awful lot of time with the kids lined up waiting for the restroom instead of being able to have them engaged in the program. So note to self was next time, bring in some porta potties, provide additional access, or use a different facility. So again, a number of items that we are trying to share for folks to think about and consider as they developed a program. Next slide, please. And so because I'm trying to be brief, and like I said, most of everything that our research showed has already been talked about today. It's exciting for me as somebody who's been in the industry for 30 years. I was one of those kids who got my license at 17. I probably would have got it sooner, but my dad said, you can't start taking it because I'm not driving you. So I had to wait to get my driver's license before I could drive to the airport. And I had the benefit of sitting around. I was totally an airport rat, sitting around with World War II vets who were World War II pilots and a World War II flight mechanic. And I hung on their every words. And I think my passion for this topic right now is looking forward is we have limited opportunities to get exposed to those kind of folks today who are providing that. And so we need to step in and take that role. The opportunities to hang out in at a general aviation airport and with the coffee crew is fairly limited these days. And so we're looking for other ways to engage them. And I'm guessing, as our conversation has been today, a lot of those kids today probably aren't interested in that. We're going to have to engage them through other means, social media, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever else is out there that we're going to get them. So some of the key takeaways from our study was we do need to spark that interest. We need to connect them with all the different career opportunities, because sometimes that niche and that passion is going to be better served in one of those other things other than just a pilot. What we learned from all of our conversations with our event coordinators was to start small, find the scale that fits to their resources, your time, your capabilities, and bring that home so that you have a successful event and then build from there. And then the connectivity, we really heard a number of folks tell us that, we're doing some stuff here and it breaks our heart because we don't have that next step. We have somebody come out and they participate in a camp and they say, this is great. What can I do next? And we don't have that step. So hearing everything that's been talked about today, if we can create that connectivity and learn from others so that we can move it forward is critical. And our finding, I think, was the biggest opportunity was that a database with all of this information and how do we find those pieces, how do we connect them, and how do we connect with each other is really one of those key missing links. And with that, that's mine.
Perfect, Stephanie.
Thank you.
You were the cherry on top for sure. And I think in terms of sort of encapsulating the conversation for the whole day. So, so thank you very much. I'm just wondering, in terms of the 6 different pieces of the pathway, does your report point out sort of best in class or elements of best practice that make up each of those different buckets?
Not to the degree that we would have liked to. That really just, manifested itself as a outcome of the report, that we had that aha moment of, this is the part that's missing. Mm-hmm. So we outlined it as best we could with what we thought we could do. And again, kind of keeping in mind our focus was more at the local level. So mm-hmm. I'm sure there's much more that could be done to expand that to a broader context with some best practices. We've asked ACRP to consider a follow-on, but it sounds like maybe the task force is going to handle that for us. So
yeah, exactly. I was just thinking maybe expand the subcommittee could help. Other questions from the group? I'm sure there's a question about how do they get a copy of the full study? Is that possible?
There is. I mean, it's pretty easy. If you Google ACRP report 202, it will be right top of the list.
Terrific.
And I can put the link in the comments if you'd like.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay,
thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so at this point in the agenda is where we had planned for members of the public to speak. There were no requests from members of the public to speak today. I also want to highlight for everyone here today that members of the public may present a written statement to the task force at any time by sending it to the organizational email address that was identified in the Federal Register notice. Well, I think this has been an incredible day. Thank you to all of our panelists, many of whom have spent the whole day with us, which I think is wonderful. And the fact that they were able to reflect on the things that we had talked about and also say, hey, this was really important, or you might want to think more about this, has been terrific. And thank you to all of our task force members who not only today, you're going to hear me say thank you a lot over the next year. I know you all have regular jobs in addition to this. And so your ability to devote 6 hours today to this effort and the ongoing effort that you're going to put into this committee work. And it clearly is important, right? I mean, we know it's important, but I think hearing from the panelists today too, that our conversations reflected things that they've been thinking and talking about is just a great first step. So anybody have any other items that they'd like to bring up before I ask Angela? If anybody has anything or thinks of anything, I bet you're tired, to consider at our next meeting. Oh, Ralph, go ahead.
Can we get access to the PowerPoints as well?
Yes, yes, that was addressed. Angela said she'd be able to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, perfect. If you think of something, if you could get those topics to me in the next 10 days, I would greatly appreciate it. And Angela and I will consider the topics to prepare the agenda for the next meeting. As I think I mentioned before, next step will be to get the subcommittee chairs together and talk about overlap and where we can share data, where we know we have resources, where we want to go get things. And then we'll set up time for another full group session. Okay, over to you, Angela. Thank you again, everybody. Great start.
Well, thank you so much, Sharon. I'm just so excited that we're finally where we are today. This was a long process to get to where we are. I know you all are happy also, but I just want to reiterate what Sharon said. Thank you all so much for all of your support. I know it's a lot of work and you all are doing this voluntarily, but it's all because of your passion and your dedication to the aviation field. And so again, I just want to say thank you to that. I also want to let you know that all the information will be posted to the committee website probably within a month, because we have to, put it in a certain format before it is posted there. And that committee website is the one that was posted or that was included in the Federal Register notice. And so with the exception of that, it's been a pleasure today. I hope you all enjoyed yourself. I know everybody is tired, and then we all can breathe. Any other words from you, Sharon?
No, I'm great. Thank you, Angela. Everybody have a terrific weekend and just looking forward to working together. Take care.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.